Start the recording. And Stephen, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Douglas, and tonight I'll be talking about spatial temporal analysis as warning intelligence. The case being the Hamas attack on Israel and its people on October 7th, 2023. Now, let me say right off the bat, you probably noticed this is story map. I originally did it in PowerPoint, but everything I assure you that I did in PowerPoint is in this story map. So we thought it lended itself well to this type of brief. I'll call it a brief. Okay. Also, I'd just like to mention right off the bat an outline of what I'll be talking about. And the headers you see here make a good outline. First, I'll be talking about the significance of what happened on October 7th, and we'll discuss the primary question. And I'll tell you what that question is right now, and that is whether previous Hamas indirect fires were an indicator of where and when the attack on October 7th might occur. So that's our goal. I'm going to consider several hypotheses. We're going to reveal some assumptions that we made. There'll be temporal and spatial considerations, go over those. And then we'll look at the frequency and forecasting of attacks. And finally, a conclusion. Okay, so unless you've been living under a rock, you know what happened on October 7th. I'm not going to really discuss that too much, but we're going to look at the significance in a historical context of what happened on October 7th. It was the third worst attack in history, terrorist attack, that is, ever since terrorism data has been compiled in 1970. This is behind the 9/11 attack and an attack in Tikrit, Iraq in 2014. So it's, highly significant in that manner. Regarding the history of Israel, it's the worst attack since the country was founded in 1948. Over 1,260 people were killed. It was 31 times as large as the number of people killed in the next most fatal attack. And in addition, there were several verified accounts of sexual violence against women. Regarding what happened, let's go over that a little bit. The worst, most fatalities were in the area of the Supernova Festival, or just what some call the Nova Festival. There were about 4,000 attendees there. Many people drove away when they saw the militants coming. Many of them came in contact face to face with them as they ran in foot. And the militants killed as many as they could and took hostages as well, as we know. And on the way to the music festival, they went through some towns, such as this town Barry here. And these are just some pictures of the devastation on the way. Now, there were three main points where they infiltrated the fence. Now, let me say that this area, Gaza, is pretty heavily fortified with a fence, and in some areas, a large wall as well. They infiltrated 22 towns and took control of 7 of them. They also infiltrated 2 or 3 military bases, one of them from the water. They came by boat, of course, to the water, and they found amongst the Hamas militants that died blueprints, tactical guides, Hebrew Arabic translations. So one can say they were well planned in advance. Their mission was well planned in advance, and we found the evidence on them. So how much preparation and training went into this? This graphic on the left shows several training areas in black, and there was also we'll call it an exercise or drill announced in 2020, and those are the areas in red. Some of them are very close to the northern border of Gaza, as you can see. And Erez crossing is the crossing into the north part that they breached, and they took over that crossing area as well. These pictures on the right are actual pictures of where they trained in the northern part of Israel. In this training areas, they have mock towns, they have a tank. So they practice. They practice breaching Israeli defenses, hostage taking, raiding compounds, and the last of which took place only 25 days before the actual attack on October 7th. So I think we can say they trained in advance pretty confidently. Now this video here, this is I inserted a video from the Wall Street Journal. You're free to take a look at it. These are videos from Hamas fighters. They posted a lot of this on social media, and it shows that they trained for exactly what they did. Now, the strong pillar exercise, as I mentioned, this was announced by the leader of Hamas. 10 Palestinian factions were brought together for exercises, and Hamas directed them and led them. They're basically the central command since 2018. And regarding motorcycles and paragliders, these are also part of it. Although that wasn't announced on social media, they found in computer files that these were part of the attack. And this particular picture was taken on October 7th. It shows paragliders. We know there were some of those as well as rockets being fired on October 7th. So they practiced as they trained. They trained and they conducted themselves as they practiced. This video on this graphic on the left, teardrop shape, those are the actual areas they infiltrated. And on the right, it shows practicing and also October 7th, breaching right through the fence line. Now, the actual attacks began around 6:30 in the morning. They fired 2,000 to 5,000 rockets toward the central and most central, northern, and some in the southern part of Israel, mainly to population centers. Ashkelon, which is just considered southern Israel, but just north of Gaza. They fired their first salvo there. The squares in red are their first salvo, and the ones in the purplish color are the second salvo. Now, I should mention too, our question involves indirect fire. Well, what is indirect fire? Indirect fire involves using data to fire, which is usually in the form of inclination and azimuth. That's opposed to direct fire, which is usually line of sight. In other words, you see it and then you fire at it. Sometimes indirect fire, you can see your target. Don't get me wrong, but data is used to fire, so you'll try your best to hit the target. That data being using azimuth and inclination. So finally, we come to our primary question, which I mentioned before. Were previous Hamas indirect fires an indicator of where and when the attack on October 7th might occur? So first, we'll start kind of generally to answer this question. Let's take a look at data throughout the period from 2016 to 2023. This graphic on the right just shows clustering of those attacks. What's most noticeable, I think, is that most of these attacks occurred throughout the Gaza region. And this is predictable, really, because most of the munitions are short range. The Qassam rockets, they say, are their favorite rocket to use. They only have a range of about 8 kilometers. And they would fire these around the Gaza region mostly, and they've been doing so for a long time, over 20 years, actually. We notice in looking at the data as well that it was declining from 2018, but then it rose again in 2021. Now, this graphic on the right is rather static, I admit it. It's looking at the entire time period. But wouldn't it be useful if we can look at a video, and the video gives us an appreciation of time as well as place where they attacked. And I'm going to try and hit my link here. Well, that's not working. So I'm going to do this. See if I can get this to work. All right. Okay. Now, this actually runs from 2016 all the way through 2023. And the time slider you'll see when it hits 2019. However, in 2018, there was a right around here is when it started to hit the peak number of attacks. Around 2018 were the most attacks. And you can see most of them around Gaza, and occasionally they go up north. Okay, now we can see the time slider. And in 2021, the summer of 2021, was another surge right there. So you see a big surge of attacks throughout Israel, mostly around Gaza and up to the north in 2021. 2022, it went down, went way down, less than any of the other years that we covered. And in May of 2023, it rose a little bit, but not anywhere near prior years. It wasn't even above 2019. And we'll discuss that a little bit more. Now, they have several different types of rockets. Many of these are from Iran. And there's several videos on social media as well that show that what they do is they bury them in the ground much of the time, and then they dig them up and put them together themselves, along with packing in the projectile material so they'll fire off. They both said they can strike anywhere in Israel, and they can. Israel is a very small country. And by the way, this is a Qassam rocket, their favorite rocket, and some of the victims are pictured behind. But they have many different rockets. We don't know exact numbers, weren't reported, but many different with different ranges. Israel is a very small country, as I was stating. It's only 470 kilometers in length and about 135 kilometers wide. You can travel east-west through the country in about 6 hours, if you could. The total is only about 22,000 square kilometers, or 8,630 square miles. It's not a big country. It's about the size of New Jersey, really. So they can hit anywhere with their 250-kilometer rockets from Gaza. Now, as I said, their favorites were the shorter range that they've been using for years. And there's a couple of good reasons for that, really, tactically speaking. Within 10 kilometers, you only have 15 seconds to react. The warning time is lower, closer to Gaza, of course, closer to where it's fired from. 40 kilometers, as it shows on the graphic on the left, you only have a minute to react. But surprisingly, I have found from most readings that the people were so used to it over so many years that there was less fatalities in this region after a while because they've learned how to dive and jump into the bomb shelters. All right, now the four hypotheses that we considered they involve significant spatial patterns or significant temporal patterns and everything in between. So insignificant spatial patterns, insignificant temporal patterns, significant spatial, insignificant temporal, all four combinations, excuse me. Those were considered. Assumptions that we had to make. First of all, the data is armed conflict landing and event data. And these show events, by the way. These do not show the number of rockets. We needed to assume that the ACLID data is sufficiently complete and correct. Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th was planned prior, and we have shown in part that it was. The planning included deception of the event and timing, and that Hamas attacked their intended targets. What we want to show is, what we're looking to show is that the firing, indirect fires show their intention. Okay, now let's move on to temporal considerations. Temporal is the when. When did Hamas favor attack by rocket? This graphic shows as a calendar, and it shows throughout Israel from 2016 to just before the attack on October 7th, that most attacks occurred in May. Next was July, then June. I'm sorry, after May was August, then July and June. Okay, so they favored attacks in May, which is spring into the summer. That's when most of the attacks occurred. There was one attack on October 12th. Here you can see. In October, very few. I just see four days that they favored. Now, if you look at the area just east of Gaza, southeast of Gaza, it's very similar. May is number one, August number two, a little bit heavier in July and June than all of Israel, but basically the same order of months that they favor. And once again, October, not too much. They don't favor that month. Another question we asked was whether they attack on major Jewish holidays. And we looked at several, and we found that most attacks regarding any holiday occurred during the holiday of Shavuot, which is in May or June. But we just said that in May, most attacks occurred. So that was really a coincidence. Most of the attacks in May during Shavuot occurred in 2021. Now, we look at all the attacks over the years from 2016, you can see it's up and down in this line graph, but it was declining. In 2018, 162, and 1920, down, then up to 116 in 2021, and then 2022 is even lower. Spatial considerations, quickly take a look at that. The best spatial considerations, I looked at cluster, kernel density, as well as hex bin. Hex bin I found was the best because you can measure it, you can make statistics from it. And this was done from a spatial joint between the points and the hex bins. I also did hotspot analysis. Most significant spots were around Gaza region, which is no surprise. And the ones up in the north are also significant, but those are more dispersed. So where did they attack? We found they attacked mostly in Ashkelon, Besor, Gerar, Beersheba, Ashdod, and Tel Aviv. Excuse me, in that order. So, and these are these areas highlighted as we go along. These are all areas of heavy population. Then we took a look at the towns themselves. You can see from 2018 to 2022, it declined. And these are the actual towns that they attacked. So it went way down from 2018. The only town where it increased a little bit was Netivot. I also did forest-based forecasting, and we found no significant change, certainly not a spike as what we saw on October 7th. Nothing like that. So that didn't really see it either. Now, it's time for my conclusion. We found insignificant spatial and insignificant temporal patterns. Regarding the towns and areas that were attacked, that was the main, that was our finding, insignificant. In general, the number of days attacked by rocket were falling since 2018. The areas of attack were rarely attacked before, and the number of days they were attacked were relatively small in comparison with more populated areas. There were some incendiary balloons in September of 2023, but they landed in open areas, so that wasn't really significant. The deception was these continual attacks were normal, and it was unforeseen that an entirely different type of attack would occur. All these facts support the idea that people were lulled into a false sense of security. It did not expect a significant attack of the magnitude and type that occurred on October 7th. And that concludes my brief.
All right, Stephen, good job. We have time for a question or two before we move on to our next presenter. I'd like to make one comment if I could. So, do we know who is actually planning these attacks, or is there any constancy in who plans them, or has there been a change in that kind of planning process?
From everything I've seen, it came from Hamas. Um, as far as I'm talking about the blueprints, for example, that were found on the soldiers, the computer data that was uncovered, which showed their planning. Um, as far as I have not seen anything in the news personally that showed any other entity involved in the planning, but I don't know everything. That's what I've seen myself.
All right. There's a question for you in the chat window.
Okay. All right, let
If
me
you,
read it. You mentioned, after her thanks, you mentioned that the best spatial approach to explore the spatial distribution of the events was using the hexagon grids. How did you define the optimal size of those hexagons? Great question. It's trial and error, pretty much. I started pretty big, and then I kept getting smaller and smaller until I found a size that looked where I was, not biting off too much land. You don't want to go too small, you don't want to go too big. It was just really what I felt was a good small area, not too big. It's kind of a judgment call on myself. Yeah,
all right. Thank you very much, Stephen. If you could put your email contact info in the chat window in case someone wants to follow up with you afterwards, that'd be great. And then if you stop sharing, we'll get our next presenter ready to go.
absolutely.
All right, Selena, if you would share your screen.
Yep. Can you guys see it?
We can now. So we can hear you and we can see your presentation. So go ahead and start.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Selena Soto, and my capstone project is titled Improving the City of Seward, Alaska's Cemetery Map through End User Participation. And the image on this slide is the entrance to one of the 5 cemeteries that the City of Seward maintains. So the agenda for today is that I will go over a quick personal introduction, which will then lead into the project's background and how I got involved with creating a cemetery map for the City of Seward. I will then talk about the project goals and objectives, along with previous research that has been done on creating mapping applications for cemeteries. And then I will go over my methodology and data on how I conducted my own remote usability survey. After, I will discuss the survey tasks and the functionality and formatting issues discovered with the cemetery map from participants' feedback. And then finally, I will wrap up with the improvements I made to the cemetery map and finish with my conclusion. So a little bit about myself is that I worked for the City of Seward from 2021 to 2023 in their community development department. I originally started out as a planning assistant, and then I worked my way up to being their GIS technician. This is an image of City Hall. I worked on the 2nd floor. I was right behind that pine tree my window was. And then in the fall of 2023, I did move back to California, but I'm still able to work for the city remotely, which I'm very grateful for. And the cemetery mapping application was actually the first project that helped me transition from an assistant to a GIS technician. The community development department was in charge of the cemetery maps, but the information we had was quite dispersed. We had hand-drawn maps such as this one, And then we had old GIS data, and then we had some historical sources that mentioned individuals who were buried in the Seward cemeteries. And so when we got questions from the public about where people were buried and we didn't really have a clue where they were, I knew we had to make the cemetery mapping application a priority. So to continue with a little bit of the project background, in the late summer of 2022, when I still physically lived in Alaska, the city planner and I rented out a GNSS receiver and we recorded visible headstones. Our results are the red triangles on the right-hand side here. That same summer, City Council also approved for ground penetrating radar results, or GPR, for services to be done within certain sections of the cemetery. And their results are the orange rectangles here on the left-hand side. And I do put this as a layer in my final design and my prototype for the public to use and see. So here's a screenshot of the prototype that I had created. I did release it to the public in February of 2023. However, before this project, I had received minimal feedback from end users, and this may be because I didn't really provide a platform for them to share their feedback. It would just have been if they wanted to reach out to me via email individually. Therefore, this Capstones project's objective was really focused on using end user participation to improve the functionality of the cemetery map. And then since I am working remotely for the city of Seward currently, the goal of this project was to determine if remote usability surveys are a valid platform for end users to share their feedback. And then hopefully, if this is a success, we could use this method in the future for city of Seward, for other city of Seward mapping applications. For previous research, I found a few examples where individuals had created cemetery maps using GIS and spatial databases. The first example I found was an online web map created for the historic St. Michael Cemetery in Pensacola, Florida. It was created by Johann Liebens in 2003. He had received a little feedback from the public who mentioned it had been a little too complex for them, so he created it to a more simple design and more simple features. Here is his design on the right-hand side. It just has a search bar and then just like 3 buttons, so a little bit more simplistic for the public. And then my second example that I found was done by Sarah Harge in 2017. She surveyed and recorded grave sites for the Rock Creek Cemetery in Chance, Maryland. And then she put it as a public map, which is this on the right-hand side. But she didn't really receive too much feedback from the community other than that they were really grateful for the project. So both of these examples didn't really have a platform for the public to share their feedback, and they didn't really conduct any usability testing to see if the cemetery maps could be improved upon, but this could be because they didn't have it as a scope of part of their projects, or they didn't have time for it. However, I did find one project done by Christopher Bravo, a student from University of North Carolina, and he had done usability testing for a future cemetery mapping application. So he was helping out the Friends of Oberlin Village, a group who maintains the Oberlin Cemetery in Raleigh, North Carolina. He got 9 volunteers from that group to look at other cemetery sites, such as findagrave.com. And then he had them tell him what features they liked and what they didn't like. And then he took this feedback to design a cemetery mapping application specifically for them. So my capstone project is a little similar to the study, but different in that I wanted to conduct usability testing on the prototype I created and then get feedback from volunteers on what they liked about my prototype and what I could add to it to improve it. So in order to conduct a remote usability survey on the cemetery map, I used my own personal laptop as the hardware, and then I used the city's Esri software, ArcGIS Experience Builder, to host a web page that the usability survey was on. And then to create the usability survey itself, I used SurveyMonkey and ArcGIS Survey 123. And then hardware for participants, it may have varied depending on what the participants chose to use to complete the survey. It could have been personal laptops or a public computer, such as at a library. So here is the website that I created for the usability survey. I have it divided up where the left-hand side are the tasks that I have the users or the participants do. There's 6 tasks, and this was done by SurveyMonkey. And then I embedded the prototype of my cemetery map right in here. And we'll go over the task.
Selena, you're probably going to have to share your new screen because we can't see the
Oh,
prototype.
okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's all right.
Let's see. Okay. Can you see it now?
No, yep, there we go, there we go, yep,
There?
yep, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. You might have to help me when I go back to my presentation. I
Yeah,
thought
no,
it.
that's okay,
There.
go ahead.
Okay. So this was the website. So I had a little introduction here for the participants, and then this on the left-hand side are the SurveyMonkey tasks that I had, and then this is the embedded prototype here on the right. So to go through the tasks, I had 6 tasks for the participants to do. The first one was to look for Irene Branson. Sorry, it's a little lagging on my end. And then they were supposed to select her, and then the map would zoom to her location, and then the participant could rate on a Likert scale from very easy to very difficult on how they thought how easy it was to finish that task. The second task was to find her obituary, which is on the right-hand side, and then they would click that, and then they could rate it. The third task was to click the image of the headstone to enlarge it. I'm not going to do that right here, but if you clicked it, it would go to another tab and open it. And then on the task 4 was to clear the results. And then task 5 was to add the GPR results layer. Sorry, it's a little slow. And those are those orange rectangles I talked about in the previous slides before. And then the 6th task was finding the legend and trying to read it and see if it was if the symbols and the colors were a good representation of the burial plot availability. But you can see in mine it was a little smushed in the corner, but the plots were occupied for pink, available for green, and then yellow for reserved. And then once they were done with those 6 tasks, they were directed to finish a more detailed feedback section using ArcGIS Survey 123. And they were asked to describe their overall experience, if they had any issues from the cemetery map before, to describe it, and then the main reasons they would use the map, just in case if there was another reason I could implement into the prototype for them. And then if they would do more usability surveys in the future. And then I also had a volunteer demographics section, if they were a city employee, or if not, did they live in the area, or if they were from out of state. And then their age group and how they would rate their overall computer skills. So I did send out this survey via the city clerk's emailing list and a Facebook post shared on the City of Seward's Facebook page in an attempt to get about 10 to 15 volunteers from city staff and the public to participate in this survey. And then, is it still sharing the correct screen?
Yeah, we're seeing this survey.
Okay, can I change it back to the PowerPoint? I'm going to change it to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Okay. Is it back there?
Yep, yep, you're good.
Okay. Okay. So for the data, the data used for this project were the survey responses collected from March 6th through March 29th of this year. I was able to get 20 participants, which exceeded my expectations, so I was really grateful for that. I had 7 city staff and 13 from the general public. I did have more participants, but they only completed the SurveyMonkey task, so I didn't really include them in this study. And then for the 20 participants that I did have, their ages ranged from 25 to 65 years years or older, excuse me. I had the majority being 65 years or older. And then for computer skill levels of the participants, the majority were intermediate, 1 basic, and 6 advanced. So the SurveyMonkey task results showed that task 5 was actually the easiest task to be done. That was turning on the 2022 GPR results layer. I calculated this by combining the very easy section here in blue and the easy in green here with this chart here. So the majority, or all 20 of them, rated it easy or very easy. The second easiest task was task 3, clicking the image of the headstone to enlarge it. That had 18 of the majority say it was easy or very easy, followed by task 1, which had 16, and then task 2 was the 4th easiest task with 14. And then task 4 and 6 were split, with 9 have ranked it very easy, and then 7 ranked it easy. The reason I put task 6 as the 6th easiest task, it just had 1 more individual that rated it a little bit more difficult than task 4. So when reviewing the detailed feedback from the ArcGIS Survey 123 section, it became clear why certain tasks were rated the way they were. For instance, some of those participants rated task 1. They had issues seeing the search bar, so they recommended possibly changing its color or the widget style. And then task 2 had 3 participants rate it as difficult or very difficult, and one suggestion was to label it with the word obituary, as in my prototype, it wasn't labeled obituary before I had changed it. And then task 3, it also wasn't really user intuitive without the survey task directing the user to enlarge the image. So a tooltip or a hover function was suggested that said click to enlarge. And I wasn't actually able to do this as a limitation of ArcGIS Experience Builder, but I did put it in a tutorial in the new final design. And then task 4 was actually more of a complex issue. I had to call Esri support to understand the limitations of the select tool in the list widget. So if anybody else has to use the ArcGIS Experience Builder list widget, a user has to unselect the feature in the list before clearing the search results, which is a little hard to understand for novice users. And then one suggestion was to add a help button or put it in a tutorial to help people understand how to clear their results better rather than refreshing their web page over and over. And then task 5, that was the one that was rated the easiest, but several participants commented that it would be helpful spelling out GPR to ground penetrating radar, and then providing some sort of description about the layer, because some of them were not, they didn't understand what it was. And then task 6, that had very mixed results. Many participants were actually not able to expand the legend to see it, which I discovered was a formatting error with the web page I created that hosted that embedded prototype. So with my own personal laptop, it was a little smushed, but I didn't realize that users couldn't expand it. So, but I did have one participant mention that they did like the simplicity and the colors of it. So from all of these responses, I did keep the legend the same, but I will make sure that it is not in a locked format for future usability surveys. And then from the feedback provided to me by all of my participants, I was actually able to improve the cemetery map in multiple ways. So the first one, I did switch that search bar to a different search widget, and I changed the background color to a little bit lighter blue. And then I also added this help button and this little text that describes how to clear the results. I also added obituary to the file name, because before I didn't have it, so now it's more clearly labeled for people to find it. And then one participant had suggested that rather than showing just the selected individual when they search for him or her, to have all the plots show up. So I created a default plots layer so that all the plots show and the selected individual shows at the same time. And then in the top right corner where I had the widgets, I added some more, and I put them in a widget controller to keep them uniform so it looks a little bit better than what I had before. And then for the widget improvements, I did create a new a tutorial for the users. This actually pops open when the users get to the web page, and it's in the help button section in case they need to revisit it as well. But I created it by making little videos and by recording my screen and PowerPoint presentation, and then I exported it to GIFs and was able to import it to ArcGIS Experience Builder with their image one. And then it has a little description of what they need to do to figure out how to navigate the map a little bit more. And then I had a columbarium widget, which the city installed a columbarium in late 2023. So I was able to put like a bookmark to its location on the map. And then the layers, I just spelled out ground penetrating radar results. And then I added an info button that gives a little bit more background on the map and on the layers itself. So overall, I do think this experience using remote usability surveys was quite a success, and the cemetery map definitely improved a lot based on the suggestions of participants. I am hoping it will give future users an easier and more enjoyable experience when they use it next. And because this methodology was such a success, I will definitely be employing usability surveys in the future for City of Seward mapping applications. And then this is the final design of my cemetery map with the widgets in the top right and then the light blue background. But that concludes my presentation. I thank you guys for taking the time to listen to it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, great job. That's a really practical solution to what I'm sure many city agencies find as a common problem. So congratulations on getting that put together. There's a couple of questions for you in the chat window.
Okay. Okay, so someone asked, they thought it was really great about the feedback that I got to improve my site. And then did I need to add or modify the JavaScript or other coding? Or did I just rely upon Experience Builder's abilities based upon changes I made? So I really, the only coding that I had to do for Experience Builder was a little bit of arcade just to make the expressions to show like their full name in the list widgets that I had. But other than that, I didn't really have to do much coding, which was pretty nice. And then another person asked, would I do anything differently if I were to do a similar study again, or maybe something I would like to expand upon? Yeah, so I did learn a couple lessons along the way. I did send this survey to the city planner first before I sent it out to the public to find any hiccups. And that's when I found out that select function was a little bit more complex and I had to call Esri. And then the other thing I did look at, I tried to cross-tabulate the results of like people's ages and their computer skill level, and I didn't really find any trends with them. So maybe next time I think I would describe the computer skills a little bit better, because there was like a vast majority that were intermediate, but I don't know their skill levels with like navigating maps. So I'd probably add a question more specifically on how often do you use like online web maps and can you navigate them easily than other stuff? Because I think that's where users were dispersed amongst that intermediate category. And then another question that I received was any consideration for ArcGIS dashboard. I have used dashboard only once before, and I haven't had much time to play around with it. So I might be able to use that for the next time, because the SurveyMonkey portion and the Survey 123 when participants didn't complete both sections, it was a little bit hard for them to do. So if I can figure out how to do it on a dashboard to just maybe do like ArcGIS Survey 123, that'd be a great idea. And then one other question was, did you do any research to determine who the end user would be? Yeah, people looking for loved ones, people looking to reserve a site, government entities, other. So I actually didn't get many other responses to my question. Most of them were using the website for finding an individual, or some said that they would use it for GPR results. And then some said they would look for reserving a site. So I didn't really have anything other than what I designed it for, which was kind of cool. And then someone else asked why I use SurveyMonkey and Survey 123. So the reason I did that was because I'm a little cheap, but SurveyMonkey, for their basic plan for free, you're only allowed 10 questions and you can't have any open-ended responses. So if someone wanted to comment, they were only given a single line. So I really like the functionality of Survey 123. Since the city already had it, I could use that for a more detailed feedback section. And then someone just gave me a great tip of using the selector element and ArcGIS dashboard for something more intuitive. So I will definitely look at that. Thanks. Thank you.
Just one real quick follow-up question I had. I didn't know if you had any comments from the survey about the GPR layer and how those polygons didn't line up with the grave outlines.
Yeah, I did actually get one participant she's really good at finding or providing detailed feedback, and she had mentioned it. And the reason, so some parts of the city cemetery that we're supposed to note, like there's one section, the Oddfellows Cemetery, that's not supposed to have people other than in a certain spot. And when we did the GPR results, it showed that there was tons of people in there, but everyone we had asked, like people from the 1960s, they're like, no one's buried there. So I think in my info widget, I definitely need to describe like some of these disturbances could be tree roots or from like a previous road, like if any type of disturbance was there, rather than it specifically being an individual, because it might not be an individual buried there.
Yeah. I'm sure there's all kind of reasons as to why, how they position the casket or the vault or, whatever wasn't in alignment with the headstone orientation, perhaps. There's probably
Right, that,
all kinds of reasons for that. That was purely an offhand I just was curious to know if anyone else other than me picked up on that.
yeah, no, someone did. So,
All right. Well, thank you very much, Celine. If you could put your contact info in the chat window, that'd be great. Someone have a follow-up question, they can get a hold of you.
all right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Next up, Manuel Larson Santos is going to give our next presentation. So, Manuel, if you can share your screen, we can get you all set up.
All right, folks, let me get this fired up. All right, are you seeing the full slideshow there?
It doesn't look like you've started sharing your screen yet.
Okay. How about now?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
All right, just title page is coming in. Yeah.
Yep, you're all set. Go ahead.
All right, folks. Well, my name is Manuel Larson Santos, and today I'm going to go over my capstone project, photovoltaic soiling loss modeling with PVlib and Python automation. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. I'll give you a little background on the problem, go over the goals of this project, some background information and previous research on the underlying issues and all the different points informing this concept, some of the data used in this project, methodology to process all of that and prepare the ultimate tool that I'll be developing, the results of that process and the modeling results that the tool yielded, discussion of that, and a little conclusion to wrap things up. So in short, solar energy is what we're talking about today. It's deployed in many parts of the world, increasingly so as the days go by. When designing solar power plants, when you're coming up with initial designs, you want to estimate how much energy a power plant is going to produce. And part of the process of doing that is assessing the system losses, where you have an idea, on paper, this power plant is going to produce X amount of megawatts, but because of all the different engineering issues, environmental issues, it doesn't quite necessarily produce that much. So quantifying and characterizing those different losses is a big part of designing any kind of solar power plant. Specifically, today we're going to be talking about soiling losses, which are one of the main environmental components to system losses. And ultimately, the problem that we're addressing is that soiling loss calculation at this point is more of an art than a science. There's a lot of different models that have been developed, but the process to come to a determination of what % of energy loss in any given month a power plant will experience due to soiling is can be rather tedious, time consuming, programming intensive. There's no easy, accessible way to do it. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The goal of this project is to produce a Python script tool for ArcGIS Pro called PV Soiling Loss Modeler that will find the closest weather station with necessary data to produce soiling loss estimates and use the PVlib Python library of functions to analyze the meteorological data using established modeling techniques that we will go over in a bit. So the quick background, what is PV photovoltaic energy? We're talking about measuring the irradiance received, solar irradiance received in any particular location. So how much sunlight energy a particular point on the Earth's surface receives. There's different flavors of solar irradiance. On the right here, we're looking at the three main types. Basically, direct solar irradiance, diffuse solar irradiance, like on a cloudy day versus a sunny day with more direct light. And then the global horizontal irradiance, which is kind of a cumulative measure of all the different forms of solar irradiance. We're measuring solar irradiance in watts per meter squared. And you'll hear me use the term PV module typically in relation to solar panels, PV module being kind of the industry term. What is PV soiling loss? So when solar panels or PV modules get dirty, things like dust and bird detritus accumulate on panels, and it will block the physical sensors of the solar module, and thus reduce the amount of energy that is absorbed by that solar module. And over time, that can accumulate to substantial losses for a site. Typically on the lower thresholds, you're looking at maybe 0.5% of losses in energy yields in any given month, up to 20% or more, depending on the type of location you're in. Areas with low precipitation and high air pollution experience high soiling rates. Desert locations where you don't get a lot of rain, or if you're in an agricultural area that a lot of soil and dust gets kicked up in the air during agricultural activities, that kind of buildup accumulates on the panels and causes reductions in energy yields. So why is this a problem? Is we are deploying more and more solar energy throughout the world. Solar energy is making up a bigger and bigger share of the global energy production portfolio. So when you're talking about an entire planet's worth of energy production and 5% losses, that can be a very meaningful result. So any incremental improvements to our understanding of how soiling impacts the production of PV energy at a particular site can go a long ways to improving the efficiency of solar energy production and meeting our goals and for renewable energy and our global demand for energy in general. So this is a quick overview of some of the different types of system losses that need to be modeled when you are assessing the performance of a proposed site. This is a graphic provided by the Sandia National Laboratories that focuses on a lot of this kind of work. The main components we're focusing on in this project are the first three steps here: irradiance and weather inputs, plane of array irradiance, and then the resulting shading and soiling. Once you get into these subsequent steps, it's more of an electrical engineering question that really just dives into the particular technologies that you're working with for solar panels, the gauge and material of the wiring that you're using, the transmission distribution. There's all kinds of different factors that contribute to the total system losses, but today we'll focus on the soiling. So existing soiling calculations are done one of two ways. They're either collected by data on site, or they are modeled using kind of established methods for calculating this kind of thing. The image you're looking at on the left here is what's called a solar monitoring station. That is an on-site meteorological data collection facility that, for example, the company that I work for will deploy in advance of developing a PV facility to collect on-site specific data to refine our modeling and understanding of how those what the reality of that location is. You're looking at the thing on the tripod is the main data collection apparatus with a bunch of different meteorological measurement tools, some small solar panels there, one that's kept clean, and then one that's allowed to accumulate dirt over the course of the month and the years that the system is deployed. And then the big solar panels on the left are what's powering the whole thing. Some common soiling models that we'll be talking about today are the Kimber and Humboldt State University models. Typically, when you're developing a site, you would deploy a solar monitoring station, but in lieu of that, or in advance of that, you got to use models with the best available data, since you typically don't have on-site data beforehand, before you get going on these site development processes. So another big contributor and portion of the whole soiling loss picture is snow loss modeling, and that is growing in our understanding. It's relatively we're still trying to crack this one as far as how to best model soiling losses due to snowfall, snow depth, snow accumulation, building up in front of the panels. The picture here shows how some panels you'll have the kind of an uneven distribution of the snow that'll melt off over time. But all of those panels on that middle rack there of the PV modules are losing a lot, or not absorbing as much energy as they could. So getting a better understanding of that is it's a work in progress, but we're using the established models. The Townsend model is kind of the most established model, with the Marion model gaining some popularity these days, and I'll get into a little more detail on what those are. Ultimately, soiling modeling, as I mentioned, is an imperfect science. There's a lot of limitations to what data is publicly available for any particular location, of inconsistent coverage in meteorological data across the country and particularly across the world. It's expensive to collect on-site data, so that doesn't come till later on in the site development process, but you want to have an idea of what you're working with before you get to that point. Soiling loss modeling does not currently account for phenomena like hail and ice buildup. A lot of times PV modules have hydrophobic surfaces and like de-icing processes that they work with to limit that, but modeling of that is not yet incorporated into our understanding of soiling. There's no single soiling loss model that works for all locations. And in terms of kind of the academic consensus, they're still working out and trying out a lot of different models to see what actually works. There has yet to be any kind of comprehensive comparative analysis between any available soiling loss models. And part of that is due to the difficulty of accessing data and applying those models. So what the goal of this project is to create the tool that will help facilitate this process by selecting weather station and satellite data automatically, checking to see if that data is available for the closest weather station to a particular location, then processing that weather station data to produce soiling loss and snow loss models, using the pvlib library, Python library of functions, pvlib being a Python package that's developed by folks at the Sandia National Laboratories to bring together various system modeling approaches into a more accessible Python-based interface. However, to access that, you need to have programming background. So the part of the intent of this tool is to kind of work around that, do a lot of that programming behind the scenes so that the end user does not have to. So the data that's used in this analysis, start off, we were talking about weather stations. The Global Historical Climatology Network has data sets or has stations all over the world, thousands of them in the United States. They're a great source for local meteorological data, kind of managed and administered in terms of the data processing through the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. The data from those GHCND weather stations, the daily summaries data is one of the big data points we'll be using to understand the precipitation, snowfall, and snow depth data sets. These are specific, the nomenclature they use, precipitation just being rainfall, as opposed to snowfall, and then snow depth being the amount of accumulation of snow on the ground over time. These are used in the Kimber soiling models as well as ultimately in some of the snow loss models as well. Got the daily or monthly climate normals data set, which is an aggregation of meteorological data over the span of a 30-year period, coming up with monthly averages. So on the table on the left is what this data set looks like, where you have first column is the mean daily maximum temperature across each month of the year. And so these give you a sense of what the climate patterns are for a particular location across time, normalized over the span of 30 years. We're also going to be using satellite data called typical meteorological year. And so this is a data set that's compiled using Landsat satellite data that basically creates a composite representation of what the most typical weather for a year may be over the course of the span of the data collection. So it's not exactly an average, it's more like February. The most representative February in the span of 30 years was from 2002, and the most typical March was from 2012, and the most typical May was from 2004. So they'll aggregate these data sets into a single year's worth of hourly data. So it's quite the process that they use to get to this point, but this is a standard data set that we use when we're modeling the meteorological phenomenon in a particular location. In particular, we're interested in the radiance data sets here, as well as the temperature and relative humidity data. We're also going to be using a few sites that we have SMS stations deployed. This is from my own organization. These will be the sample sites used in the analysis of the modeling results for the soiling modeling. The data was collected on site for 1 year and includes all the usual types of data points that we would want: rainfall, temperature, relative humidity, all that kind of stuff. To start off with this effort, first thing is just to figure out what do we actually need to do here. So start off by interviewing colleagues and getting a sense of the existing workflows and frustrations with that workflow, to then create kind of scenarios that kind of describe the different ways that a solar resource analyst will achieve soiling loss modeling calculations. Then the next big section is developing the actual Python script to do all the various tasks here. First one being identifying the best weather station. So that is the nearest weather station to the input coordinates that has the complete data availability. So the right time span of data. You don't want just a weather station that has data from the last year. And it also has to have all the necessary data columns. So not all weather stations collect the same kinds of data. So part of this process is going through and checking the data availability, the coverage, and the span of time available for a location. And then also getting the satellite data, which is a little more of a straightforward process, just using the input coordinates and requesting it from PVGIS, which is managed by the European Union Science Foundation. Once the data and once the weather stations and the data have been identified and retrieved, then getting into the PVLib based analysis. So plane of array calculation here. This is basically the measure of how much solar irradiance is hitting a solar panel depending on the angle of the panel and the angle of the sun. And so that changes daily, hourly. So we ultimately calculate these hourly measurements. And fortunately, PVLib has some built-in functions for that, but there's a lot of variations in how to accomplish that, various models that are accepted for that, the main two being the Hay and Beres models. And so that'll be ultimately an option we'll want to have as something in the tool to toggle between. Once the plane of array calculation has been determined, then we can commence with the soiling modeling. So we're looking at this as the Kimber model. Ultimately, the Kimber model assumes a constant rate of soiling that's reset when a particular threshold of rainfall has occurred, which there's no set threshold. That's part of what's like all of these variables. That's part of the fuzziness of it all. Is every organization has their own preferences on how many millimeters of rain constitutes a sufficient rain threshold, or the grace period being the days after a rain event where soiling is less likely to accumulate because there's less debris in the air because of the recent rain event. The rate at which soiling occurs without any kind of rain event is kind of assumed rates, and then the reset value, how much rain is accumulated before things reset. So this is basically what we're talking about here is a bunch of different variables that the solar resource analyst will tweak and fuss with to find the best balance that works for their particular location and their system specifications. So ultimately, once the modeling approaches have been incorporated into the Python scripting, then it's just a matter of putting it all together into a Python script tool intended for use in ArcGIS Pro. The basic input parameters for this tool are going to be the coordinates for the proposed PV site, so just the lat long for a particular location. And then the user will go through a series of parameters to determine the soiling loss modeling specifications, the plane of array irradiance calculations, snow loss modeling parameters, and then ultimately just an output folder where they want to save the output files. And then once the tool has been developed, then usability testing by solar resource engineers will be conducted. I reached out to several folks within my organization, and over the course of about 2 weeks, they tested the tool and provided feedback and kind of worked back and forth on this. I also conducted cost-benefit analysis, looking at just the expense of the utilities and the comparison of time saved over time using this tool versus traditional methods. Resources required included the physical hardware, software for ArcGIS Pro, and the Python development software, in this case PyCharm. And then these are the Python packages that I use to create the Python script, primarily leaning on ArcPy and PDLib, with a few others to do kind of administrative stuff. So the image on the left is the final Python script tool as it's seen in ArcGIS Pro. You got a bunch of different parameters here. I'll go through it very briefly, but ultimately the tool was fully operational, successful in selecting weather stations, downloading data, performing the soiling loss modeling, and compiling results into a readable document at the end. The user has a bunch of different parameters that they can choose from. Most of them are pre-populated with default values as indicated by PVlib, so they don't have to go through everything every time. There are options to include things like monthly, like a manual wash in a particular month, which would reset the soiling values. This would be the kind of thing you do if you're experiencing high soiling in an arid part of the world and you're not expecting any rain, but you want to bring down the soiling, so you'd actually go out and send a team to wash the modules, which is a very expensive effort. The sample sites were across the United States. This table here kind of shows the results of the soiling modeling conducted at these 6 sites. Very briefly, the sites in Texas and Arizona, you can kind of look down at the annual loss results. Sites in Arizona did fairly well. Sites with more snow didn't do as well, and I'll get into that momentarily. So again, the proposed Python script tool achieved all the goals. It was able to successfully process all the data, collect everything, and do everything that it was intended to do. Some of these images, the image on the left here, the PV loss soiling model results. The messages here gives you a little rundown of what you would see when you run the tool. It runs through, looks at each weather station nearby, says, all right, this one's 33.9 kilometers from the input, but it doesn't have the necessary GHCND data, so it's moving on to the next one. Ultimately, until it finds one that has all the data that you need, it'll prepare all that, download it to CSV files, and then run through the soiling analysis to produce a little summary table as seen in the bottom here. The image to the right of that shows the output CSV file with those summary losses, including the parameters used for that modeling attempts. Everything worked great, except that the Townsend snow loss modeling results were often unexpectedly high, reaching loss results greater than 50%, which you wouldn't really expect to see unless you're somewhere in like northern Canada and you're getting meters and meters of snow at a time. None of these sites were that far north, and so it seems like there's an issue with the modeling or something in the methodology. It's yet to be determined exactly where this issue is coming from, whether it's an issue with the methodology to produce the results, an issue with the PV-lib based Townsend modeling, or just shortcomings of the model itself. The Townsend model is not a perfect thing. So to figure that out, I've been looking under the hood for the PV-lib reference. I'm going to be corresponding with folks from Sandia National Laboratories to see if we can figure this out together. I'll be actually meeting with them in a conference in Salt Lake City, Utah next month, actually 2 weeks from now. So hopefully get a chance to pick their brains about that. So to the next steps in this are ultimately to resolve issues with the snow loss modeling, review methodology, coordinate with NREL and Sandia National Laboratory developers to figure out what's going wrong with the soiling loss modeling to improve confidence in those results. Ultimately, the Kimber results looked good, but the Townsend snow loss modeling results threw everything off. So gotta figure that one out first. In addition to that, I'd like to expand options for data sources to include things beyond public data. There are private data sources that require subscriptions, but have access to more complete data for more locations, and want to add functionality so that this tool works beyond the United States and is functional in international context. And then also looking at refining the weather station selection process to integrate land cover analysis into the weather station identification so that it looks at more than just distance and data availability. So in conclusion, soiling loss modeling tool is working great with the caveat that the snow loss is off. But otherwise, all objectives were met with resolution of the snow loss concerns. Hopefully, this will be a tool that will help solar resource analysts produce modeling results quickly and according to their specifications, and will facilitate our understanding of the range of environmental variables that go into developing and characterizing the PV site. Quick view of the references. And any questions?
All right, Manuel, thank you. That was a great presentation. One question that kind of popped in my head when you're talking about the snow accumulation is, are there any, I don't know what you want to call it, retrofit kits or whatever, that like you have in the rear window defroster of your car, these thin wires that go over the stretch of your windshield that you can defrost. Is that even something that's been put into action with solar panels?
So there are, there's, everything you can think of under the sun, they're trying out. The idea of having like a heating element in the panel is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, basic idea.
So that is considered as well. Part of it, the issues there are just the amount of real estate that takes up on the solar panel itself. Would increase the size of the module and add some different levels of complexity in terms of just more steel required to engineer the thing and get it stabilized in the ground to handle wind loads and all that kind of stuff. So it's a
Yeah.
balancing act of how small you can make the module and pack in all the necessary components versus how how many different things and layers you sandwich into these PV modules. Different
Right.
technologies that come up with different solutions, but ultimately that something like that would also require like an additional amount of energy consumption to produce that heating. So it's like a whole, it's a whole thing. They're looking at different options, and there's no single perfect solution. And ultimately, what we're learning is that we need to have a robust understanding of all the different ways to characterize these phenomena so that we can come up with the best solution for that particular location. You're not going to have a one size fits all for any of this kind of stuff. So um, it's just about
All right.
understanding the permutations.
Yeah. You have a question there in the chat.
Yes. So the question is with regards to identifying nearest weather stations calculations, and how mountainous areas or coastal areas. So basically like characterizing the terrain in terms of understanding the weather station suitability. Is that, I guess, what I'm gathering from that? Yeah, so that's part of what I'd like to continue working with. At this point, the weather station selection process just looks at physical distance, as the crow flies, and then checking at data availability. And so that can lead to misrepresentation of the appropriateness of that data. If you're going 50 kilometers away for the closest weather station, and your site is along the coast, and that weather station is 2,000 feet higher in elevation, then it's not going to necessarily be the best representation of or proxy for that location. And so I'm looking at options for characterizing elevation and land cover more completely, in addition to distance, to better characterize that. So maybe the 50-kilometer away station is the closest, but there's one weather station that's 65 kilometers away that's a more comparable terrain type and elevation. So that would be perhaps, that would arguably be a better solution. Again, things like if the weather station is at an airport and the site that you're looking at is in agricultural fields, several miles away, it's not going to be a perfect proxy. And that's part of the problem here, is that the modeling is inherently flawed when you're using data that is, or it's inherently limited when you're using data that is not on that is not collected at the location of the proposed site. So the long-term solution is to deploy ground stations, solar monitoring stations to collect on-site data, but that can be expensive and time consuming. And in anticipation of that, using these weather stations as proxy is the best approach that's been developed thus far. But again, it has a lot of room for improvement.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. If you want to put your email in the chat window, that'd be helpful. Someone wants to contact you later.
All right. Thank you very much, folks.
All right. So next up, John Klein will be our next presenter. So John, if you want to start sharing your screen, we'll start your presentation. All right. We see your,
Sure. Can you hear me and see me?
yeah, we see you and we hear you. So you can go ahead and start when you're ready.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is John Klein, and welcome to my capstone. Hang on a second. Let me put this in full screen. Oh, geez. Pressure.
If you just hit F5 on your key keyboard there. It should go to full screen automatically. Uh,
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
look
think it's
under
under
view.
slideshow. Sorry to interrupt. Slideshow would be one way, and
Slideshow.
then from
Okay.
beginning.
Sorry, what a rookie mistake there. All right, my name is John Klein and welcome to my capstone presentation titled Enhancing Electrical Grid Mapping with YOLO NAS Deep Learning Object Detection. So a little bit of a background about what I do. I'm a GIS technician at a GIS vendor and IT services vendor. And my team, the GIS team, is contracted to Duke Energy here in North Carolina, the major energy provider here in North Carolina. And we help them to map the electrical grid and keep their electrical grid database up to date. And that helps them to optimize the grid, improves customer delivery, secures critical infrastructure, and decreases outage time. And we do that mostly by referencing CAD drawings and construction prints provided by electrical engineers. But another part of what we do is locate older assets and satellite imagery. And this requires naked eye identification, and it relies on older, poor quality satellite imagery, and it often takes a lot of time. And it can lead to data integrity issues down the road. So I was curious if there was a way to leverage current technology to sort of optimize and enhance this process. So I took a deep dive into deep learning. Deep learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and machine learning, and has a number of applications in the world today. It more close to home in the GIS industry, specifically in remote sensing. It has applications in object detection, image classification, and change detection. And I was curious if maybe object detection would be the most appropriate tool to find those facilities or the assets in satellite imagery. It seems applicable to me. So there are a number of popular object detection algorithms out there. Here they are listed. One of the more successful algorithms is YOLO, or you only look once. There are to date 9 versions of YOLO, so we're up to YOLO v9, and there are 2 subversions that are built on top of YOLO v8 and YOLO v9. So to avoid getting into the weeds with how deep learning algorithms work, I'm going to provide a kind of a high level explanation of how YOLO works. YOLO is built on top of convolutional neural network, CNN, and it initiates several CNNs to take a look at your input images and start processing the data there. It starts noticing edges, textures, and complex patterns, and starts basically narrowing down those pixels and grouping them together to pass through these other types of layers, the fully connected layers, pooling layers, and connected layers. And then it passes it to the YOLO detector, which initiates a single neural network to take a look at the whole image, break it down into a grid, and then draw a probability label bounding box around objects that most closely resemble objects that the model is trained on. Excuse me. So we'll draw those labeled bounding boxes around objects that look like what it's looking for. And so moving on to the project, the data that I acquired for this project is an open source Maxar sample data set. It's at 30 centimeter resolution. It's a solar panel data set. I think it's mostly used for training models to identify solar panels. It's overhead of some region in Germany. I'm not sure of that. I couldn't find much information about where it is exactly. It contains 2,500 images. And from those images, I was able to annotate and use roughly about 850 images for my model. And there are some issues with this data set that I'll discuss a little bit later that I think might have hindered the performance of the model. But I chose this model because well, high resolution satellite imagery is quite expensive. So this was a free open source option that I had access to. And it's relatively, well, it's pretty high resolution. Moving on, I used RoboFlow, which is an end-to-end cloud computer vision application. You can do everything on their website if you have the free tier or a paid subscription. You can annotate, store your data in the cloud. You can annotate those images and then move those annotated images to your data set and do all the pre-processing and data augmentation, and then train your model on those images. And I'll get into that process. So here's some examples of what image annotation looks like. Basically, you're labeling objects in the image that you want your model to be trained on. You're just drawing a bounding box around that object. And because I'm looking at the electrical distribution network, I mostly focused on these wooden electric poles with the cross arms. You see them driving down the street everywhere, and then street lights. One consideration I want to note here is that I decided to classify these objects in the same class. Typically, you would want two classes or multiple classes for your different types of objects. And that, once I get to the results, we'll discuss that a little more. But I did that because there are so few of these wooden poles in these images. And I think that's because of this area of Germany is mostly relying on solar panels. So their electric distribution network is probably underground. Good for them, but not so good for my data set. It was a limiting factor, I believe, which I'll talk about a little later. Next step in the process after annotating is image pre-processing, which requires auto-orienting your images. And what that does is removes a data type from the image. It's a EXIF data type from the image, and that allows the model to see the image as it exists on disk. Next step in the process is data augmentation. And RoboFlow offers a few different ways to augment your data. I opted for flipping the image. So we have the original image here, and I flipped it to create a mirror image. And then I rotated each image in, well, every direction. And what this does is, one, it allows you to extend your data set. So I was able to get 2,082 images out of the original 629 images. And it allows the model the opportunity to look at these objects from multiple perspectives, which adds some strength and robustness to the model. Excuse me. Before I get to the results, I want to discuss how you evaluate an object detection model. There are three main metrics for evaluating the evaluation. It's mean average precision, which is the average precision of all objects in your class, or of all classes in your data set. Precision, which is how well the model predicts where an object might be, and then recall is how often, or if your model predicts correctly, how often did it do so, basically. And to calculate those things, you have to know the difference or understand the sort of the difference between predicted labels and real labels. Your real labels are the labels that you draw when you're labeling or annotating images. Predicted labels are the labels that it actually puts on the model actually draws on the image itself. Excuse me. And so there are 4 different classifications for the difference in those 2 types of labels. There's true positive, which means that there's an image or an object present and the model correctly predicts that the object is present. There is a false positive, which is the there is no object present, but the model predicts that there is an object. A false negative, meaning there is no object present, or there is an object present, but the model fails to identify the object. And then a true negative, meaning that there is no object and the model appropriately didn't predict that the object was there. Okay, so here are the results. I trained the model 3 different times, and this was the highest map that, or mean average precision that I could achieve. So the map is 54.7%, the precision is 74.4%, and the recall is 40.6%. Not a great result, not what I was expecting. Definitely not in line with what I found in the research, where other researchers using YOLO V8, they achieved into the 80s and 90%. Okay. Here are some examples of the testing data set, the test data set. There are definitely some false positives here. Here, that's a sidewalk. Not sure what that is. And up here is it's like a fence for this property back here. So not sure that the model performed super well. But there are some limitations to that. One, I think my annotating considerations probably hindered the performance of the model. I probably should have categorized the two types of poles into separate classes. But again, I opted to do that because there were so few of these wooden electric poles in the data set, in the images. And I didn't recognize that that might be an issue until I annotated several images. So another limitation would be the data set itself. Again, I was pretty limited in my option, since high resolution data is so expensive. And the data set just didn't have what I needed, probably because of the neighborhood relies on underground electric network. The RoboFlow free tier is pretty intuitive in most ways, but there's definitely some room for improvement. And it only gives you 3 training credits. I would have liked to have kept going, adding more data and continue training the model to see truly how well it could do. But that was my only option. I don't have access to the proper hardware. Yeah, so that's all I have.
All right, thanks, John. One one question about your uh, process of annotation. I've never annotated anything, so maybe help me here a little bit. When you draw your box, right, you're taking in more than just the feature itself, because your feature may be at an angle, but your box is a box. So how much of the non-box area do you have to consider as being defined by the thing that you're annotating, if that makes sense?
That's a good question. Um,
Because you can make your box really big, right? Or
yeah,
small, or uh, I would think that the larger the box is, the more extra stuff
the
that
more
isn't the
pixels.
thing. That would be confusing to the annotation process.
That's a good question. I wasn't certain of that. And a lot of the cases, the shadow of the pole is really the giveaway that there's a pole there. So I had to make the boxes for the most part rather large to capture the shadow, as well as the pole itself. That's another consideration that I made that I'm not certain uh, was optimal for this project, or testing a model, in other words.
Yeah. So are you limited to just a box? There's no like free-form tool that you can draw like a polygon around the thing?
There is that option. I didn't consider that.
It'd probably
Uh,
take more
that's
time.
Yeah, it would have, and
Yeah.
that's a good idea though.
I was just thinking of that as you showed the images. I thought, well, okay, so there's a box that's picking up extra stuff that may not be recognizable to the algorithm. So, anyways, I just was throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for John? Well, we'll kind of move on here. So, John, if you could put your email in the chat window, if someone wants
Sure.
to follow up with you, they can. So, thanks for a great presentation. Good job.
Yeah, thank you all for your time and attention.
Let's see, Claudette, I think
Yep, present.
if you can, yeah, go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
No,
How about now?
yes, we can. Yes.
Okay.
So anytime you're ready, you can go ahead and start.
Let's see. You're not looking at the screen with my notes, right? You're looking at the regular screen?
We just see, yeah, non-note screen.
Cool, thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for being here this evening, and thank you JB, my advisor, for being here this morning in India very early. My name is Claudette Sandoval Green, and this is for my MGIS capstone project. The title of my project is Seeing the Gallery Forest for the Savannah Chimpanzee. This is a remote sensing project for grade 8 conservation in Kédougou, Senegal. So just a little bit about me, because it's related. I work full-time at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering as a GIS database developer for the Daily Erosion Project and the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework. I have 3 degrees in animal ecology, biology, and zoo animal technology. And these are pretty much the topics that I'm interested in to kind of overlap with conservation GIS. And in another life, I was a cats and primates zookeeper at the zoo in Gulf Breeze, Florida. And I worked with great apes. So my presentation overview, I'll talk about my goals and objectives, my background of my project, the study area, the methodology, the results, and lessons learned and next steps. So the spatial problem is that, well, all chimpanzees need trees to survive. The gallery forests are high quality habitat for the critically endangered Savannah chimpanzee, and perhaps even more so as climate change shifts habitats and behaviors. There are very few remote sensing studies for primate conservation and fewer for savanna chimpanzees. This project begins to survey the health of gallery forests since the expansion of gold mining in Kédougou, Senegal. It also tests the use and consistency in defining savanna land cover and land use classifications. This project also demonstrates what's possible when you harness remote sensing, data fusion, and object-based image analysis through Trimble e-cognition. Okay, a little bit about Senegal. Senegal is slightly larger than South Dakota. The population is 17.32 million people. It is the westernmost country on the African continent. Dakar is the capital, and its port is very important. It is known as the gateway to West Africa. And the region of Kédougou, where my study area is right here, is in the Sudanian zone, which is characterized as the domain of the savannas. A little bit about the chimps. They were listed as critically endangered in 2016 by the IUCN Red List. The next categories are extinct in the wild and extinct. The population estimate is around 18,000 to 65,000, and that's an 80% decline since the 90s. They have a unique suite of behaviors that are adapted for an open, hot, dry, and mosaic environment. They termite fish, just like their jungle counterparts, and hunt galagos with a spear that they fashion and make for themselves. They utilize microclimates such as gallery forests, caves, and pools to cool off during the dry season. Senegal is the northernmost limit and the harshest environment for chimpanzees. The dry season temperatures can reach 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Only 2% of their habitat is forested. They would rather be in a gallery forest during the hottest times of the dry season because this is where water, food, shade, and tall evergreen trees are for nesting. Also, the savanna chimpanzees adaptations help us to understand how our last common ancestors survived in an open, hot, dry, and mosaic environment. So Kédougou's been experiencing a big mining boom for more than 10 years now. This gold mining boom presents a great challenge to primate conservation because the mining brings new levels of anthropogenic disturbances and ecological pressures. The disturbances can include loss of group connectivity, loss of connectivity to habitat preference and protected areas due to road construction, mining pits, pond tailings, fencing, settlement development, and forest degradation. And furthermore, gold mining brings mercury contamination in the water. And this is a picture of a group of chimpanzees drinking from a polluted artisanal mining pit. And as you can see today, I mean, there's just a spike in gold per ounce. Okay, so I see three different kinds of mining types in my study area. And so starting with the large-scale gold mines, these are industrial mines that have trained employees. They use large-scale mechanized tools to extract the gold really quickly. The investors are foreign and West African. The intermediate-scale artisanal gold mine is something that's like an artisanal small mine, but there's a lot more structure to it. It's bigger. The small-scale artisanal gold mine is cultural subsistence mining. This is gold panning with iron tools and small power machines. Investors are traditional people. De jures, as they're also called, have been culturally present for millennia, and they have local roles. And I put up three pictures here of the mines, actually two, for the mines that are in my study area. One of them is the Mako gold mine at the top, that's a large scale. And the Bantako Kuta mine is the intermediate scale artisanal mine. And the third picture gives you an example of what the small scale artisanal mines might look like. This is my study area, and it overlaps with a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here, there is a national park here called Neokola Koba. And I also put an overlay of confirmed chimpanzee groups from 2012. So you can see they're pretty much everywhere around here. And unfortunately, this whole area here is also, they're sitting on a gold seam. So they like to say they're sitting on an island of gold. Okay, so moving on to my methodology, this is my workflow, and looking at it right now gives me a little bit of PTSD. So basically, like a stage one, I collected all the data. I collected my DEM, my SRTM DEM. I collected data from Planet Scope, from the Planet NICFI program, and Sentinel-2 and Landsat 8, 7, and 5. I created composites for Landsat and Sentinel-2. I had to mosaic the Sentinel-2 and the Planet Scope and the DEM as well. And then I subsetted all of this into my area of interest and fixed the spatial reference and then did some data exploration to see what was there. And then I built a bunch of layers. I created a stream network for the study area. I created a soils layer, a principal component analysis. I also created some indices for water, vegetation, and soil. And then I popped on over to Google Earth Engine, and I created some information for the monthly mean rainfall estimates and land surface temperature estimates as well. And then what I call stage 3 was the actual classification. So I used eCognition to classify my study area for 2023, 2010, 2000, and 1988. And then I created a rule set and did some refinement there using unsupervised classification and multi-threshold segmentation. Basically, I had 12 different classifications. Once these classifications were done, I exported it out to ArcGIS Pro. And in Pro, I created an accuracy assessment for 2023 and did a change detection and a presence-only prediction as well. And also a little extra at the very end here, I also classified my reference data. Okay, so just a little bit more about the data. Senegal's landscape is highly mosaic, as you could see here in these pictures. It's extremely hard to classify. There are people who've been doing it as a career for a lifetime. I haven't seen anybody try to do it with eCognition. So moving on to this, the dry season is from November to April, and May is the transitional month. The wet season is from June to September, and October is another transitional month. Senegal's seasons and vegetation growth are highly correlated with annual precipitation. The satellite imagery that I selected was for the month of December, and I did this to get kind of a snapshot of the gallery forests when the highest and lowest growth would not interfere with capturing the classification. So that's my theory. Okay, so here's some information on the Google Earth Engine data. So I used GE to look at land surface temperature and precipitation to try and see the seasonality through time. And this also helped me to choose the month of December for my imagery. You can see some really, use some big data with some very simple code. I did not write this code. I actually got it from a tutorial and I just adjusted it for my needs. And here's an example. And this is what chirps looks like for precipitation. And I provided all the links at the end of this slide presentation, and I'll also have all the code posted in my final report. And here's what the data looks like, the bar graphs that I created. So it's very hot in Senegal all the time. It's hot in the dry season, and then it cools off a little bit in the wet. For the MODIS land surface temperature, oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at land surface temperature. Yep. The land surface temperature takes about 8 days, takes an 8-day average of the surface temperature every 8 days. And you can see clearly that the dry and wet months are pretty consistent. And here's like another interpretation of this information. And so You can essentially see the same seasonal curve. I did track some highs and lows here. Let's see, May of 2019, the surface temperature was around 109.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And then August of 2005 and 2012, it was 75.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So, and here's the CHIRPS precipitation data. Sorry, sometimes I get them confused. So this is the CHIRPS precipitation data, and CHIRPS, which has a really long acronym, stands for Climate Hazards Group Infrared Precipitation and Station Data. And it's a 30-year quasi-global rainforest data set. It incorporates satellite imagery with in-situ station data to create a gridded rainfall time series to track seasonal droughts. Phew. And so as you can see here, and this is my attempt to actually try and see some seasonality here. So I put months here on the side. So you can see that there may have been a bit of flooding going on this, I think that's right around 2015. So, and just as a reference, chimpanzees have not been observed in any areas less than 750 millimeters of average annual rainfall. So that's very important. And let's see, the rain and vegetation, again, the growth are closely correlated. So you can infer some seasonality with precipitation. Okay, here's some more information on precipitation, and you can kind of see that the rainfall, it seems to be increasing, and maybe they are getting a bit of flooding going on there. And also, I want to remind people that this data is specifically extracted out for my study area. So I used a shapefile to pull this information out from my study area. And so this chart over here shows that for my 4 years, you can see 3 different patterns happening here. I also created the stream network for my study area and also for the region of Kodugu. And this is important because it helped to locate gallery forests that are predominantly found along the water courses. And here's an example of the soils layers that I created as well for my study area. And the indices that I created, these were made through eCognition. So it's important to, you can make these in eCognition through their canned indices. And then it's important to go ahead and save them and then bring them back into eCognition, because they just keep generating over and over every time you save a project, and each one can be up to 1 gigabyte. So you go in, create it, save it, and put it back in. And on these, you can see that the gallery forests pop out nicely in blue. And over here, I have the PCA. It's not a part of the bar chart down here at the bottom. Actually, the PCAs are kind of random colors, and these are features with information that is clustered and kind of extruded to show the most dominant features in the scene. And I think those turned out really well. And also, let's see, I can show you here that the NDWI for water also seems to pick up a lot of built information here as well, like let's just say burn scars and dead vegetation, sometimes like that, because it's using only the green and near infrared band, and that's kind of a feature of eCognition as well. It will use that on all sensors, and that may not be the best choice for every sensor, so it's something to look out for. Okay, so this is basically what each year took in, which each year ingested or fused for each one of my years through eCognition. And what I learned from that was that the unsupervised classification will basically only take in raster layers from essentially 1 sensor at a time. So if all these things were made from the 1 sensor, that seems to make it pretty happy. And that seems to be the only limitation with the unsupervised classification. And that took a long time to figure out. Okay, and then I also built a classification key to make sure that I was being consistent with how I was identifying things. And the goal here also really was to try and use 3 broad classifications to describe the savanna landscape. The primatologists working in this area have asked for consistency in naming and descriptions, and I applied them in my key, and they're over here for closed vegetation, ecotone, and open vegetation, and I used their descriptions and tried to stick with that with my classifications to see how that would turn out. There were essentially 14 classifications at a maximum, including no data and other. And only 2023 had all of the land use and land cover classifications, which added up to 12. So here you can see an example of what the closed vegetation looks like, what I think is ecotone. This is the open vegetation. This is an example of bare soil. This is a burn scar. Vegetation degradation also picks up just seasonal dieback on the vegetation, normal stuff. And then this is an example of development. And here's an example of roads, water body. This is a large scale mine. Here's mine tailing ponds. And this is an example of small scale artisanal mine. And this is an example of the intermediate scale artisanal mine. Okay, and here's an example of my rule set. And basically what it is that you process your indices and put that aside. And then you run the unsupervised classification. You know, you feed in all your data layers into this. They all have to be rasters. And that can take anywhere from 20 or 30 minutes to run. And then you create kind of a generic holding place for classes. And then you run the multi-threshold segmentation, and this creates the number of clusters or classes. And then you're going to match up and assign your generic tanks essentially with the clusters that were created in the multi-threshold. And then you assign the classes, that's what I just said, and then you also do some more further refining. And then you export this out to ArcGIS Pro. I wanted to let you go ahead and see what the workspace looks like in eCognition because it's pretty fancy. You can look at you know, your information with many different bands side by side and work through it while you're classifying areas. Okay, so beyond classification, I also did the accuracy assessment and I did a change detection and the presence only prediction. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to results because that's just more interesting. So this is what all the hard effort is for when you're trying to figure out what kind of layers to put into the unsupervised classification to do the data fusion. And it doesn't look very fancy from far away, but when you get up close, you get excited about what you're seeing on the ground pretty clearly. And this is the result. And there's a lot of variation here, and I'm sure a lot of reasons for why that's happening. I did look up in the literature a little bit that in 1988, the national park was pretty neglected. And so seems to be a lot of burning going on in December. And then there's like some maximum growth going on maybe in 2000. But as you move towards 2023, you can see that things are starting to thin out and open up a bit. And here are my bar charts. And basically the take home message for me is that there's the open vegetation is increasing as the ecotone and closed vegetation is kind of fluctuating around. And here's an example at a sub-regional watershed level, because things can change depending on the scale that you're interested in. And here are the bar charts, and you know, basically there was more ecotone and now there's less. In just a few decades, it's shifting to more open vegetation. And this is what it looks like at a local level. And again, you know, we see the same pattern. But things can be more striking at the local level. Here we go. Sorry about that. And I think that, this could be due to climate change or more human activity in this area, such as agriculture or mining. And then I did an accuracy assessment on my 2023 piece because I couldn't find reference data for any of the others. I tried hard to make things align, but it did not work out. And so this was better because I had Planet Scope for the exact same day and year to use for my reference data. And basically, well, the overall accuracy was 80% and the kappa was 74, so not terrible. What this tells you is that, basically the bare soil and development are blended together. They're very hard to separate out. Ecotone is really hard to tease out from open vegetation. But the closed vegetation, the gallery forests, are the easiest and best cluster to classify. And so they were always first to go. Okay, and so here's my change detection that I did in ArcGIS Pro using the wizard. That was my first time using it. It was very hard to use. I thought it was very hard. It kicks back a ton of information and having to work through that to figure out what you can use. I only looked at the closed vegetation or the gallery forests, and the balance sheet on that says that there's been a slight gain from 1988 to 2023 on open vegetation at each scale for the month of December. So let's see. And then last I did the presence only prediction, and this was just at the very end of my project. I really wanted to try and do it. I wanted to put my layers in that I had created. I had some nesting data, and I just wanted to see what would happen. It was my first time using it. I ran it about 6 times. Sometimes it takes 20 minutes, sometimes it takes an hour. But this was the best one, and I was really I thought it was super interesting that it tried to pick up the forest galleries surrounding the nesting cluster out here. And I think that if I had more nesting data, dispersed throughout the study area, that it would have done a better job picking that up. So the area under the curve was 0.8242, and the omission rate was 0.2748, and I believe that is good. I'm still trying to understand a lot of the output on this model. Let's see, but I do think it would be super interesting to try this again with more nesting points. And for the rest of it, you'll have to read the paper. Okay, and last I did do the classification for my reference data as well, because I was curious to see how it would work with imagery that was 4.77 meters. And this took about 4 hours to run. So you don't want to make too many mistakes when you're doing runs on this, or you have to have plenty of time. So I think this would be super useful at the local level to see what's going on. You could really break out the classification hierarchy. As you can see, there is a lot more going on there in Senegal than just 3 broad categories of open, closed, and ecotone. I was able to break out the ecotone into 2 more classifications, just going through it kind of quickly. Okay, so lessons learned and next steps. Just to reiterate, it's such a simple thing to say, but it's hugely important that all chimpanzees need trees, including the savanna chimpanzee. I was very happy with the unsupervised classification results. The gallery forests were always the easiest and strongest cluster to classify. Ecotone is much harder. All results depend on if I have classified the area correctly. And classifications, I think, should be a 2-person job. At the very least, it should include the remote sensing analyst and also somebody who's very intimate with the area. And that would not be me. I've never been to Senegal. And let's see, I think I've shown a viable workflow here for tracking the gallery forests at different scales within a focus month. And this can be applied to hyperspectral imagery and perhaps multi-dimensional analysis to track degradation, disruptions, and non-point source pollution in the savanna chimpanzees' environment, because of course what affects them affects us too. And I provided some key papers for references and a gold tracker. And I also created a time lapse in Google Earth for the mines in my study area, if you want to check that out. And I provided the links for the MODIS land surface temperature and the CHIRPS precipitation data for the tutorials that were online. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank my husband, David Green, for all his patience. And I wanted to thank my advisor, who is awesome, JB Sharma, and my colleagues at Iowa State University, David James and Brian Gelder, and also Jill Preetz, the primatologist over at Texas State University. And that's it. Thank you. Questions?
All right, Claudette, thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Thanks.
I loved all the videos of the chimps running back and forth.
Yeah, they're awesome, huh?
One maybe related, unrelated question. I mean, you did make a comment there at the end, and I think this was a pervasive theme throughout your presentation, is the idea of pollution and how that impacts not only vegetation, but ultimately the chimpanzees. So with respect to the gold mining, I'm not sure with the smaller and medium scale, but definitely with the larger scale, arsenic is a heavily used component to separate the gold flakes from the soil, and that arsenic then ends up in the mine tailings pond, and then I hope they would try to keep that out of the water system. Did you do any research on sort of the degradation that the gold mine has on the environment, and then how that affected your classification process?
No, I didn't really use it towards the classification process because the classification is still pretty generalized. I can't, really get down to that level, other than I did pick up, you can just make some assumptions when you see odd things on the ground. And it's really hard to, some things that I didn't cover in the talk because my presentation was already very long, is that it's really hard to see the artisanal mines on normally without having some knowledge of where they're at. They're there. I did track them with some points. I had a few points where I could go and see if they actually were picked up in the unsupervised classification, and they were picked up. But it would be better if you had some some knowledge, like somebody telling you that that's what you're looking at, or some data points to keep going with that same idea to try and get them out. So it's hard to see the little ones unless you know where they're at. So those would be sources of pollution for sure. And apparently they're pocked everywhere and they're not well regulated. That's the one good thing, is that supposedly the bigger ones are well regulated, right? And they do really, from what I understand, and I want to think good, is that they really do try to do their part to keep the environment clean there. I don't know about the intermediate, because that's just kind of an in-between. They do have a lot of rules there. I read about all the rules and structures they have in the community for the larger artisanal mines. But I'm not sure, if they're really well regulated for the type of pollutants that they're releasing out into the environment.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it didn't directly affect my my classification. I was rooting around. I could see in some places where there's leaching. I suspect there's some leaching going on. And then there's a new mine going in the study area. And I put it in the time lapse that is actually cutting through in two places in the forest, in a forest gallery branch. And I just kind of, I don't know, I'm not a part of that culture, that's, politics system or anything, but just off the top of my head, I just feel like that for sure is something they should not be doing. Cutting directly through one of the forest galleries, because then they have pond tailings that are sitting right on that water course. And like, that just cannot be good at all.
Yeah.
So I'll put it in my paper.
All right. It looks like you have two questions that popped up in the chat.
Oh, I can't see you. I'm so sorry. Hold on. Let me get out of
Yeah. Stop sharing.
some of this stuff here.
You go.
Okay. Great job. I'm trying to publish this work. And are there any conservation orgs that would be interested? I would love to publish it, and I'm sure, I don't know who would be interested. It would be nice. I'm still in communication with Jill Preetz over at Texas State University, and this is kind of an extension of her work because I'm using her data. I think for sure she would be interested in it. And so, we'll see. I am going to send all this over to her and see what she thinks about it all. And let's see, I'm not sure if anybody realizes there's like a program by BBC One called The Dynasties, and they feature an episode on chimpanzees. And that episode is on the savanna chimpanzees and the famed Fongoli chimpanzees. That's the habituated group that Jill Preetz works with. Okay, let's see. Early in the presentation, you mentioned creating all of your map layers in ArcGIS Pro, rivers, soils, etc. How did you decide what layers would be necessary? I have a paper, and I followed this paper. Somebody just happened to put together using ArcGIS Pro's new prediction only or maximum entropy model. And I just kind of followed what they had, and some of it just, common sense, I guess. These are the things that I'm going to need. And I saw right away that these, gallery forests were falling right along the hydrology, and nobody had taken the time to use the hydrology to pull up the gallery forest. It's just, JB calls it low-hanging fruit. And so that's just went for it. So, and just got lucky, I guess. Any other questions?
All right. Again, Claudette, great job. Thank you to all the presenters for their interesting talks this evening. I'd also like to thank all the faculty that showed up to ask questions and listen, and that was very, very good. Tomorrow we have another round of presentations starting at 12:30 Eastern. So if you want to tune in and hear some other wonderful talks by our graduate students, that'd be great. Otherwise, I hope you have a good rest of your day.